A week before Christmas, my parents sold my house while I was in Japan. They called me together, voices light, almost cheerful, as if they were sharing good news. "It's done," my father said. "The house is sold." I remember looking out the window of my temporary quarters, watching the rain fall over the base, thinking how calm his voice sounded. Like this was something ordinary, like it had always been theirs. I smiled to myself and asked one simple question. "You used the money?" There was a pause. "Yes," my mother said. "Why?" I let another second pass before I answered. "Your lawyer has questions." The line went quiet. I didn't say anything else after that. I didn't need to. Silence has weight when people realize something they assumed was solid is starting to shift beneath their feet. I had been stationed in Japan for several months, part of a rotation that kept me away from home longer than usual. I was used to being far from family during the holidays. The Navy teaches you early that duty doesn't pause for Christmas dinners or wrapped presents under a tree. Still, I planned to fly home after the new year, spend a few quiet days in my own house, reset before my next assignment. That house mattered to me. It wasn't fancy. A modest 3-bedroom place in a quiet American neighborhood, bought with years of saving, careful budgeting, and no small amount of sacrifice. I bought it myself, signed every document myself, paid every bill myself. It was the first place I ever truly felt was mine. My parents had never liked that house being in my name alone. They didn't say it outright, but I felt it in the way they talked about it. The family home, my mother liked to call it. My father referred to it as the house we helped you get, even though the help amounted to advice and opinions I hadn't asked for. My younger brother was different. He had always needed help, always needed rescuing, always had a reason he was falling behind. Jobs that didn't work out, investments that went nowhere, relationships that ended with someone else to blame. To my parents, that meant he needed more patience, more money, more forgiveness. I was the steady one, the responsible one, the one who didn't ask. That's how families like ours sometimes divide themselves without ever saying it out loud. The call came late in the evening, Japan time, early morning back home. I recognized the pattern immediately, both of them on the line, speakerphone on their end, voices a little too rehearsed. When parents call together like that, it's rarely for something small. My father did most of the talking at first. He explained calmly that they had made a family decision. He said it the way people do when they want to sound reasonable, as if saying the words made them true. They had sold my house. They didn't ask, they didn't warn me, they informed me. According to them, it was necessary. According to them, my brother had an opportunity. According to them, this was about legacy, about keeping money in the family, about making sure everyone landed on their feet. They talked about the yacht the way people talk about a reward finally earned. A fresh start. A chance for my brother to do something big for once. While they spoke, I thought about the nights I worked late shifts, the months I lived overseas, the holidays I spent in uniform instead of at home. I thought about how carefully I had protected that house, because I knew one day I'd need a place that felt stable no matter where the Navy sent me. When my father finally stopped talking, there was a pause, like he was waiting for gratitude. That's when I asked my question. "You already used the money." It wasn't accusatory. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't sound upset. Years in uniform teach you how to keep your tone level even when your heart is pounding. "Yes," my mother said after a brief hesitation. "Why?" I remember the exact feeling in my chest at that moment. Not anger, not panic. Something colder, something steadier. The quiet awareness that they had crossed a line they didn't fully understand. "Your lawyer has questions," I said. I didn't explain. I didn't elaborate. I didn't tell them what I already knew. Because here's what they didn't understand yet. Selling a house isn't just a decision. It's paperwork. It's signatures. It's authority. It's consent. And none of that comes automatically just because someone is family. I never gave them power of attorney. I never authorized a sale. I never signed a thing. I had learned long ago that being capable didn't mean being careless. I trusted my parents emotionally once, but legally, I trusted documents. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, listening to the rain, letting the moment settle. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt awake. Because I knew something they didn't yet know. I knew that the sale wasn't finished in the way they thought it was. I knew that money moving quickly can still be stopped. I knew that people who assume authority often panic when they're forced to prove it. And I knew that when a lawyer starts asking questions, the story changes. That night, I didn't call anyone back. I didn't send messages. I didn't post anything online. I went to bed like any other night before duty, calm and focused. Christmas was coming. And so was the truth. When I woke up the next morning, the bass was already humming. Boots on concrete, doors opening and closing, the low, familiar rhythm of a place where people knew exactly where they were supposed to be. I moved through my routine like I always did, shower, uniform, coffee that tasted faintly burned, but my mind kept circling back to one thing. Not what they had done. What they believed about me when they did it. My parents didn't wake up one day and decide to become villains. People rarely do. They acted on a story they'd been telling themselves for years, a story where I was strong enough to absorb whatever they put on me. A story where my steadiness meant permission. In that story, I was the daughter who always landed on her feet. The one who didn't need help. The one who didn't make noise. The Navy only reinforced that image for them. I wore the uniform. I lived overseas. I spoke in short sentences. To them, that meant I was distant, self-sufficient, and most dangerously manageable. They believed I wouldn't fight back. They believed I'd be upset maybe, but practical. That I'd say something like, well, if that's what the family needed. They believed I'd adjust. I always had. My brother, on the other hand, had never adjusted to anything. He was the kind of man who lived in explanations. Why things hadn't worked, why this job wasn't right, why that opportunity slipped through his fingers. To my parents, that meant he needed saving. Again and again. I had watched this pattern my entire adult life. Every time he stumbled, they leaned forward. Every time I succeeded quietly, they leaned back. They told themselves it was fairness, that I didn't need what he did. But what they really believed was simpler. They believed my house was a resource. Not my home. A solution. A fund. A lever they could pull without asking because I wasn't there to stop them. Because I was in Japan. Because I was busy. Because I trusted them once long ago and they never updated that assumption. While I stood inspections that morning, I imagined them back home. Sitting at their kitchen table, papers spread out, coffee cooling in mugs, the excitement that comes with doing something bold, something decisive. My father likely telling himself he was finally fixing things, my mother reassuring herself that I'd understand later. They didn't see theft, they saw entitlement. By midday, my phone buzzed again. A message from my mother this time, short, almost casual. We hope you're not upset, this was about family. I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. That sentence said more than she probably realized. It meant they had already decided how I felt. Upset, yes, but manageable. Temporary, something I'd get over. They still didn't understand that I wasn't upset. I was observant. Later that afternoon during a break, I called the attorney I'd worked with when I bought the house. A steady man in his late 60s, the kind who didn't rush conversations and didn't waste words. He had helped plenty of service members over the years. He knew the drill. I'm hearing things I told him, about a sale I didn't authorize. He didn't sound surprised. He asked for names, dates, the title company involved. He didn't tell me what he thought yet. He didn't need to. Leave it with me, he said. I'll look into it. That was all. Back home, my parents were likely celebrating. The yacht wasn't just a purchase, it was proof. Proof that they had done something big. Proof that their faith in my brother was finally paying off. They probably imagined him standing on the deck, smiling, a new chapter opening at last. They believed the hard part was over. What they didn't know was how fragile that belief really was. In the days that followed, their tone shifted just slightly. Not enough to reveal fear, but enough to hint at discomfort. A missed call. A delayed response. My father asking if I'd spoken to anyone yet. My mother sending cheerful photos of Christmas decorations as if normalcy could smooth over the tension. They were waiting for me to react. But I didn't. I went to work. I fulfilled my duties. I answered messages politely and briefly. I didn't accuse. I didn't threaten. I let them sit with the idea that maybe I was taking it better than expected. That made them bolder. My brother sent a message too. Something about fresh starts and big plans. He thanked me, actually. Not directly, but enough to make it clear he believed the house was already gone, the money already his in spirit. That was the most revealing part. None of them had stopped to ask the most basic question. How could they sell what wasn't legally theirs? They assumed proximity equaled permission. That being my parents meant automatic access. That distance meant silence. That my absence meant consent. They were wrong. Not because I was angry, but because I was prepared. I had spent a career learning how systems work, how procedures matter, how authority must be proven, not assumed, how calm patience often outlasts force. And I knew something else too. People who act out of entitlement rarely prepare for consequences. They plan for celebration, not scrutiny. They imagine applause, not paperwork. They assume agreement, not questions. They believed I would fold. Instead, I waited. And somewhere back home, a lawyer was reading documents more carefully than before. What my parents didn't know wasn't clever. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply quiet, ordinary truth, the kind that doesn't announce itself until someone tries to step past it. The first call from the attorney came 2 days after our brief conversation. I was walking back from the galley when my phone rang. I stepped aside into a quieter corridor, the kind with gray walls and fluorescent lights that made everything feel procedural and real. They moved quickly, he said without preamble, but not carefully. That told me enough to listen closely. He explained in a measured tone how the sale had been initiated. A listing agreement signed by my father, a title company that assumed authority based on family relationship, a buyer eager enough not to ask too many questions at first, and a lawyer, my parents' lawyer, who had accepted assurances without demanding proof. But here's the problem, he continued. Your name is the only one on the deed. There's no power of attorney on file, no authorization, no signature from you. The escrow company flagged it once the buyer's lender started doing a deeper review. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes for a moment, not in relief exactly, but in recognition. This was how systems corrected themselves. Slowly, methodically, without emotion. What happens now, I asked. That depends, he said, on how hard they push, and how much money they've already spent. I didn't ask him to do anything dramatic. I didn't need to. I asked him to notify the title company formally that the sale was unauthorized and that ownership was disputed. I asked him to protect the asset. I asked him to keep me informed. That was it. Back home, my parents were still operating on assumption. They assumed paperwork meant permanence. They assumed money in motion meant money secured. They assumed lawyers were there to smooth things over, not stop them. They had never been on the other side of scrutiny before. I imagined my parents' attorney that same afternoon, sitting at his desk, rereading documents, noticing perhaps for the first time what wasn't there. The missing signature, the missing authority, the uncomfortable realization that family wasn't a legal category. Lawyers are trained to talk, to explain, to reassure. When they go quiet, it's usually because they're recalculating. That was when my mother called again. Her voice was warmer than before, a little too warm. We heard you talk to someone, she said lightly, about the house. I kept my voice even. I talked to my attorney. A pause. Then, well, that won't be necessary. Everything's already been handled. Handled, another word people use when they want to close a door. I see, I said. She waited for more. I didn't give it to her. Later that evening, my father texted, just one line. Our lawyer says this will all blow over. That sentence told me everything. It meant their lawyer hadn't said that exactly. It meant my father was translating uncertainty into confidence the way people do when they're afraid to say, I don't know. What they didn't know was that the buyer was starting to ask questions too. A house purchase, especially near the holidays, involves many hands, banks, insurers, inspectors. One missing document can slow the entire machine. 2 missing documents can stop it. And when a buyer realizes a seller may not have authority, fear moves faster than money ever does. The buyer's lender requested confirmation. The title company requested clarification. And suddenly what my parents thought was a done deal became a file marked pending review. Escrow doesn't shout when it freezes, it simply pauses. Meanwhile, my brother was already living in the future, posting vague messages online about new beginnings, talking about travel plans, making promises to friends he couldn't afford to keep without that money staying put. He hadn't asked me a single question, not one. That more than anything confirmed the pattern. He assumed the world bent in his direction because it always had. He didn't consider the possibility that it wouldn't this time. The attorney called again before the week was out. "They're nervous," he said. "Your parents. Their lawyer asked for time. The buyer is considering backing out unless this is resolved immediately." And I asked. "And it can't be resolved without you," he said. "That hasn't changed." I thanked him and ended the call. That night, I sat alone in my quarters and thought about Christmas, about how my parents had always liked things tidy and predictable, how they prided themselves on appearances, on being respectable, on not having problems people could see. They had created one they couldn't hide. Still, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt something closer to sadness. Not for myself, I had accepted long ago that my role in the family was to be the quiet one, but for the realization that they had never truly seen me as an adult with boundaries, just a resource that happened to live far away. The next message came from my father late at night. "We should talk properly." That word properly meant the story was shifting. It meant authority was no longer assumed. It meant questions were piling up faster than answers. I didn't respond right away. Because what they still didn't know was that I wasn't trying to punish them. I was simply letting the truth arrive at its own pace. And once it did, nothing would ever feel handled again. The silence didn't arrive all at once. It crept in thin and uneasy the way cold air finds its way through a closed window. At first, it was just delays. My parents mentioned that their lawyer was in meetings or reviewing paperwork. Nothing alarming, they said. These things took time. Real estate was complicated. Holidays slowed everything down. But I could hear it in their voices now, something tighter, something strained. Confidence was giving way to repetition. They kept saying the same reassurances as if saying them often enough would make them true. My father called one afternoon, his tone brisk, businesslike. "We need you to sign a document," he said. "Just a formality, to clear things up." "What document?" I asked. "A confirmation," he replied. "Our lawyer will explain." "I'd prefer mine to," I said. Another pause. Longer this time. That was the moment he realized the balance had shifted. Not dramatically, not explosively, just enough to make him uneasy. Behind the scenes, things were unraveling faster than they understood. The buyer had requested proof of authority. The title company, now fully alert, had suspended movement of funds. Escrow remained frozen, no release, no progress, no reassurance. And my parents' lawyer, who had once been quick to return calls, was now careful, measured, sparse. Silence from a lawyer isn't emptiness, it's calculation. I imagined him at his desk, legal pad, half-filled glasses perched low on his nose. Rereading the file, noticing what should have been obvious from the start, realizing that enthusiasm and assumption had replaced verification. Lawyers don't like surprises. And this one had found himself standing between a buyer who felt misled, a title company covering its liability, and clients who had acted far beyond their authority. Somewhere in that mix, his confidence had thinned. My mother called the next evening. She sounded tired, not angry, just worn. "He hasn't gotten back to us," she said. "It's probably the holidays." "Probably," I agreed. She waited as if hoping I'd fill the space with reassurance. I didn't. "We just want this settled," she added quietly. "So do I said. But we meant different things. They wanted the problem to disappear. I wanted it resolved correctly. 2 days later, my brother finally called. His voice was too upbeat, too forced. "Hey," he said, "so, quick question." I let him speak. "The boat dealer says there's a delay. Something about funds. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" I thought about all the times I'd watched him avoid responsibility by framing problems as misunderstandings, as if clarity alone could fix them. "I imagine your lawyer can explain," I said. He laughed nervously. "Yeah, well, he hasn't been answering." There it was, the thing none of them wanted to say out loud. When lawyers stop answering, it's rarely because they're busy. It's because they're thinking carefully about what they should say, if anything at all. That night, I received an email forwarded from my attorney. Brief, formal, precise. The title company had acknowledged the dispute. The buyer had issued a notice of concern. The escrow account would remain frozen until proper authority was confirmed. No drama, no accusation, just fact. Back home, my parents were starting to feel the pressure in small, humiliating ways. The yacht dealer stopped returning my brother's calls. The bank requested additional documentation. A family friend mentioned hearing that something odd was going on with the sale. Appearances were cracking. My father tried again, this time more carefully. "You don't have to make this harder than it needs to be," he said. "I'm not," I replied. "I'm just not fixing it for you." That was the truth. I wasn't punishing them. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was refusing to rescue them from a mess they created by ignoring my autonomy. In the Navy, we talk about responsibility a lot, about chain of command, about knowing when you have authority and when you don't. My parents had skipped that lesson. They'd acted as if love erased boundaries. Now they were learning that silence could be a boundary too. The final sign came 3 days before Christmas. A voicemail from my mother, her voice breaking halfway through. "He says we need to talk," she whispered. "All of us, soon." She didn't say who he was. She didn't need to. The lawyer had spoken. Not to reassure, not to smooth things over. To warn. I listened to the message twice, then set the phone down. Outside my window, the base was strung with modest holiday lights. Nothing flashy, nothing extravagant. Just enough to remind people where they were and why they served. I felt no satisfaction, only a steady resolve. Silence had done its work. And now the conversation was about to change. Christmas arrived quietly that year. No fanfare, no feeling of arrival. Just a date on the calendar that everyone seemed to be circling without quite knowing what it meant anymore. Back home, my parents had always treated Christmas as a performance. The tree had to be perfect, the table set just right, gifts arranged so no one felt slighted, at least on the surface. It was their way of proving everything was fine even when it wasn't. This year the performance was faltering. I knew that without anyone telling me directly. The calls had slowed. When they did come, they were shorter, more careful. My mother no longer sent photos of decorations or cheerful updates. My father stopped using confident phrases like handled or taken care of. They were waiting for something to break. On my end, life continued with its steady rhythm. Duty didn't pause for uncertainty. I stood watch. I completed reports. I shared quiet meals with other service members who, like me, were far from home. We didn't talk much about families. We didn't have to. Everyone there understood absence. On Christmas Eve, I took a walk outside the barracks after dinner. The air was cool, the sky clear. Lights were strung modestly along walkways, simple and restrained. I thought about how different this felt from the Christmases of my childhood crowded rooms, overlapping conversations, my brother at the center of attention. For the first time, I wondered if my parents felt the absence too. Not my physical absence, they were used to that, but the absence of certainty, the absence of control. I received a message from my brother late that night. It wasn't dramatic, just 3 words. "Call me, please." I didn't. Not because I wanted him to suffer, but because I knew what he would ask. He would want reassurance. He would want me to fix it. He would want me to do what I'd always done, step in quietly and make the problem disappear. And I couldn't do that anymore. Christmas morning came and went with little ceremony. I spoke briefly with a few colleagues, exchanged polite wishes, and then spent some time alone. I thought about the house, about the mornings I'd imagined there. Coffee on the counter, familiar creaks in the floor, the comfort of something unchanged. I also thought about my parents sitting at their kitchen table phones nearby waiting for an update from their lawyer, waiting for escrow to release funds that weren't moving, waiting for someone to tell them this would all end without consequence. It's a hard thing watching people you love sit with the results of their own choices. Midday, my mother finally called. Her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "Merry Christmas," she said. "Merry Christmas," I replied. A long pause followed. I could hear background noise, dishes maybe, the sound of a house that was being used but not enjoyed. "He says we're exposed," she said quietly. I didn't ask who he was, I knew. Exposed how I asked. "To liability," she said, "to losing more than we thought." There was no accusation in her voice, just fear. "I never wanted this," she added. We thought it would be easier." Easier, that word again. Easier for them. Easier for my brother. Easier because I was far away and capable and unlikely to protest. "I didn't make it hard," I said gently. I just didn't make it disappear." She didn't argue. Later that afternoon, my father called. He sounded older somehow, tired in a way that went beyond a bad week. "Our lawyer says we need to resolve this properly," he said, "together." For the first time I thought but didn't say. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means we may need to sit down," he said, "after the holidays, face to face." The request was different this time. No authority, no assumption, just an appeal. That evening I sat alone again thinking about revenge. How often people imagine it as something loud and cruel, something that leaves scorched earth behind. But this didn't feel like revenge. It felt like gravity. Actions had weight, assumptions had consequences. Silence, when used carefully, could teach lessons shouting never could. Still, I wasn't untouched by it. I felt sadness for the family I thought I had, for the trust I realized had been thinner than I believed, for the moment when I understood that reconciliation, if it came at all, would require something harder than apologies. It would require recognition. Late that night, a message came through from my attorney. Just a short update. No release of funds, no progress without my consent. The buyer remained cautious. The title company remained firm. Everything stayed exactly where it was. Christmas ended without resolution, without celebration, without collapse. Just uncertainty. And sometimes uncertainty is the most honest state a family can be in when illusions have fallen away, but truth has not yet been faced. As I turned out the light and prepared for the next day, I knew one thing for certain. The reckoning wouldn't come with fireworks. It would come with a conversation. We didn't meet right away. After Christmas passed, there was an unspoken agreement to let a little time settle the air. My parents needed it. So did I. Distance has a way of stripping emotion down to its essentials, and I wanted this conversation to be about clarity, not heat. We agreed to meet in mid-January at the house I grew up in. Not my house, the one they had sold without my consent, but theirs. The familiar place with the same porch steps, the same kitchen table, the same framed photos on the wall that told a carefully edited story of our family. I flew home a few days before the meeting. Walking through the airport felt different this time. I wasn't returning for leave or rest. I was returning to draw a line. When I pulled into their driveway, nothing looked changed. That was the strange part. From the outside, it could have been any ordinary visit, but inside, everything had shifted. My parents were already seated at the kitchen table when I arrived. My brother sat with them, unusually quiet, his phone face down in front of him. No one stood up right away. There were no hugs, just nods. A sense that this was not a social gathering, but a reckoning. We sat. No one spoke at first. The hum of the refrigerator filled the space between us. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "We need to understand," he said, "why this became such a mess." I looked at him for a long moment before answering. I wasn't angry, I wasn't defensive, I was very calm. "It became a mess," I said, "because you acted without authority." My mother flinched slightly, not in protest, but in recognition. "You're our daughter," she said. "We didn't think." "That's the problem," I said gently. "You didn't think in terms of ownership or consent. You thought in terms of access." My brother shifted in his chair. "I never asked them to do this," he said quickly. I met his eyes. "But you accepted it." He looked away. I laid everything out slowly and clearly. The deed, the lack of power of attorney, the role of escrow, the buyer's concerns, the title company's obligations. Not as an accusation, but as a sequence of facts. "This isn't personal," I said. "It's procedural. You sold something that wasn't yours to sell." My father leaned back, rubbing his temples. "We didn't think it would matter," he said. "We thought you'd sign later." That sentence landed heavier than anything else. "You planned for my consent after the fact," I said. "That's not consent." Silence settled again. The lawyer arrived shortly after my parents' lawyer invited at my insistence. A polite man, careful with his words, clearly relieved that I was calm. He confirmed what I'd already said, though hearing it from him made it real in a way my words alone could not. There was exposure, he said. Significant exposure, financial and legal. My mother's hands trembled slightly as she folded them together. We could have lost everything, she said. "Yes," the lawyer replied. "That was a possibility." My brother finally spoke again, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "The boat's gone," he said. "They took it back." No one reacted. There was no triumph in that moment, just consequence. "I don't want you ruined," I said then. "That was never my goal." They all looked at me surprised. "But I won't protect you from the truth," I continued. "And I won't pretend this didn't change things." My father nodded slowly. "What do you want?" he asked. It was the first time he'd asked me that in years. "I want acknowledgement," I said. "Not excuses, not explanations, just recognition that what you did was wrong." My mother's eyes filled. "We were wrong," she said quietly. "We took what wasn't ours." That mattered more than any apology. We discussed next steps. The sale would be formally unwound. The buyer would be made whole. Costs would be absorbed not by me but by those who had created them. The house would remain mine. That was never in question. As the meeting drew to a close, something shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. Before I left, my father stopped me at the door. "You didn't raise your voice once," he said. "You didn't threaten. You didn't humiliate us." "I didn't need to," I replied. "The truth did that on its own." I drove away feeling lighter but not celebratory. Some victories don't feel like wins, they feel like endings. And endings, even necessary ones, deserve to be treated with care. The house was never the hardest thing to reclaim. That surprised me once everything settled. The paperwork unwound cleanly enough. The buyer was refunded. The title company issued formal apologies. The escrow account released funds back where they belonged. The system corrected itself the way it usually does, quietly, methodically, without ceremony. What took longer was the family. For a while after that meeting, we didn't talk much. Not out of anger, but caution. We were all learning how to speak to one another again without relying on old assumptions. My parents had lost something intangible, authority they believed they had simply by virtue of being parents. I had lost something too, the illusion that good intentions protect against harm. Time passed, winter faded, life resumed its familiar pace. I returned to Japan, back to duty, back to routines that made sense. But something in me had shifted. Not hardened, clarified. Boundaries once imagined were now spoken. Ownership once taken for granted was now understood. My parents, to their credit, didn't rush reconciliation. They didn't ask me to put it behind us. They sat with it. They lived with the embarrassment of explaining quietly why a yacht that had briefly existed in conversation was no longer theirs. They absorbed the financial consequences without asking me to intervene. That mattered. One afternoon, months later, my mother called just to talk. Not to ask, not to explain, just to talk. We spoke about small things, the weather, the garden, a neighbor who'd moved away. Toward the end of the call, she said something that stayed with me. "We forgot," she said, "that loving you didn't mean owning your life." She didn't say it to be dramatic. She said it like a realization she was still turning over in her hands. My brother struggled more. Losing the yacht forced him to confront a pattern he'd spent years avoiding. There was resentment at first, then embarrassment, eventually something closer to humility. He found work, not glamorous work, honest work. We don't speak often, but when we do, there's less expectation in his voice, more accountability. As for the house, I kept it. I didn't sell it out of spite or reclaim it as a trophy. I kept it because it was mine and because keeping it meant something different now. It wasn't just shelter. It was proof that adulthood requires defense sometimes, even against those who raised you. When I finally stood in that house again months later, it felt quieter than I remembered. Familiar but changed. Like me. I walked through each room, slowly touching walls, opening drawers, standing at windows. Not to celebrate, but to acknowledge. This place had survived assumptions. So had I. I didn't cut my parents out of my life. I didn't punish them beyond allowing consequences to stand. Reconciliation, when it came without fanfare. No grand apology, no sweeping declaration, just altered behavior, respect, distance where distance was needed. That I learned is sometimes the most sincere form of repair. If there is a lesson in all this, it isn't about revenge, it's about clarity. Family love does not erase legal reality. Good intentions do not substitute for consent. And silence, when chosen carefully, can protect more than anger ever could. For those listening who have adult children or aging parents, there is something important here. Independence is not rejection. Boundaries are not betrayal. And assuming access to what belongs to someone else, no matter how close you are, can fracture trust in ways that take years to mend. I don't regret how I handled it. Not because I won, but because I didn't lose myself in the process. I stayed calm. I stayed honest. I let systems do what they were designed to do instead of turning family conflict into warfare. Sometimes the strongest response isn't confrontation. It's restraint. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of a moment where silence spoke louder than words, I invite you to reflect on it. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you find value in stories like this, stories about dignity, boundaries, and quiet accountability, consider subscribing or following along. Not for the drama, but for the lessons we carry forward. 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 Forward.